Well, thank you all for coming. I like meetups. You know, it's great that we're recording. People can watch it later, but I like the interactive part about it, you know, so being in person. So I've got a bunch of slides. I'm very passionate about QA, got a lot of ideas. I've been in the industry a long time, you know, but I'm looking forward to having, you know, it be a discussion. So feel free to jump in, questions, comments, whatever you want to do. So I'll say a few words about my background, but maybe first just a couple administrative things. So I'm not really representing Pandora policies or ideas here. These are just me sharing my thoughts from years in the industry and spending a lot of time thinking about it. Probably goes without saying, but I'm not going to share anything proprietary, and you know, be great if you also stuck to that. It's tempting to, you know, share about what we're doing and whatnot. A lot of stuff is fine, but if anything's proprietary, you know, like if I ask you a question and you think it's not appropriate to answer, feel totally comfortable not answering. Yeah, and let's be interactive. So my background, I have a bachelor's and a master's in computer science. I spent about 13 years as a developer and a development manager. As a software engineer and a manager, I was always passionate about quality. So I got intrigued with sort of development processes and how to write better software, work closer with QA. And I eventually got into a startup where I was one of the 8 founders, and I was one of the architects. And I thought that was my big opportunity to do software right. So, I get to blank sheet of paper. We can design everything, we build quality, and from day one, this will be fantastic. So that was a really good learning experience, because what I discovered is there were 2 other architects and about originally maybe 4 other software developers, and we all agreed, yep, we're all going to do this stuff. We're going to write software in the way you should do it. We're really going to have the discipline and take it on. We agreed on a bunch of things. We all went off, designed some stuff, went off, spent almost a year writing code. Came back together, and there was tons of bugs. So I said, well, what happened here? You know, we all agreed we were going to do these things. I said, yeah, I didn't do it. Like, oh, okay. Why? Didn't want to. Like, well, I thought we all agreed it was a great idea. They said, you know, Dave, that's great for you, and your software doesn't have any bugs. And I go, well, it did, but I wrote unit tests, and I, you know, did all this other stuff. And oh, that's great. That's fantastic. Give us your software, and we'll integrate it with it. We'll know that if there's a bug, it's our problem. Okay, thank you for the compliment, but like, why didn't you do this? Oh, didn't want to. Okay. I said, I need to go into QA, because I'm not going to get quality working in development, I see, right? So I actually went to the CEO of the startup and said, can I start the QA team? And that was my transition into QA. A little bit of a windy path from there. I did, when that company eventually went under, you know, I'd been managing a pretty big team, and I was looking for jobs managing large groups, but it was a small company, so it was like maximum of 50 people that I'd managed. And I started interviewing around for management jobs, and they said, oh, we need somebody who's managed 100 or 200 people. I was like, oh, you know, what's the difference? 50, 100, you know, it's not that different, right? So a friend of mine called me up and he said, hey, I heard you're looking for a job. And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, I need some help. I need somebody to come manage this QA team of about 100 people. And I said, oh, well, that's interesting. It would look great on my resume to have managed 100 people. So, and I've been, you know, real intrigued with QA. I started QA at this other place. Then I went back into development management for a while. I said, yeah, let's do it. That was where I got sold. Like, you know what? I actually like this better. Like, I just have a, you know, passion for the quality side. So I sometimes tell people I sort of swim against the tide, because it seems like a lot of people in QA are trying to get in development. But so the reason I wanted to tell that story is because I think that quality engineering and quality assurance is discipline, it's a career path, and it's a specialization that is going to be around for a while despite different rumblings that you hear. It's going away, you know, programming is going away. And so I'd like to share my thoughts about why. That's kind of the origin of this. All right. So what I'm going to talk about, what are silver bullets as I describe them? Why are they there? What is it that QA really does in a software company? And then how do you create an optimal test strategy? So a couple words about test strategies. That term is used in different ways. I've read a lot of test strategies in my career that say, oh, we've got these 3 test systems, we're going to get builds once a week, we're going to run, you know, some manual tests and automated tests. And I'm like, okay, that is not a test strategy. So we'll talk about really what that is. And then I thought we could just talk some examples. I worked at a bunch of different companies doing different types of software. Happy to share my examples, and you know, or also have you guys chime in with things you're working on and how it might relate to some of these things. One other thing I'll say, I like to think that the best insights are the ones where you hear it and you go, oh, well, now that I hear that, that's obvious. Like, I actually knew that. You didn't have to tell me. Well, but until I said it, you might not have thought of it that way. And one of the things that I find is that people that have done QA for a long time actually know a lot about it, but somehow maybe don't feel there are people wanting to listen to their insights, because oftentimes, you know, we get told what to do. Well, you got this much budget, this much time, right? Here's what we need you to do, just go do your best. Like, so a lot of what I want to do is maybe empower the ideas that you've had, or give you some things to crystallize around and think about how you can contribute and grow your career. So, hey, come on in. These are a bunch of really good things. Like, I don't think there'd be a lot of controversy. These are all good things, right? Things that have evolved over the years about how to produce good software. So the good things, unless they're abused, like a lot of stuff, right? And so people try to turn them into silver bullets. So what does that mean? In the mid-90s, there was this short-lived fad. I actually went to some seminars where they said, do not test. You shouldn't test software. It's bound to fail. The way you're going to find the bugs is you're going to do code inspections. Not code reviews, but code inspections. And we're going to teach you how to do it. You have 4 people. They have these 4 different roles. You go through every line of code. There will be no bugs. Don't need a QA team. You just need to do code inspections. Automation, of course, is a great thing, unless you then think you don't need to do any manual testing, right? So I was working at eBay, leading a QA team, brought in a new VP whose previous job was in operations, running a data center, who said, don't need to do manual testing. You can do everything with automation. So every QA thing we do here is going to be automation from now on. Well, I'm sure at a data center that was true, but eBay, you know, it's a website with millions and millions of people using it, has usability, visual aspects. In my opinion, that didn't work out all that great. Continuous delivery. Again, great idea. I love it. Unless you think that you can change the code, check it in, push a button, off it goes, into the pipeline. As long as the test passed, boom, it's in production. No human beings have to make any decisions. Like, I'm not convinced, let's put it that way. Agile, probably not quite as abused, but, and I think this is moderated, but in the early days, it was kind of like, you really don't need QA. Everybody's kind of a developer. Some of them might specialize in writing automated tests. What little QA you need is embedded in these Scrum teams. So the silver bullet there is we don't need a QA organization. We don't need QA managers. We just, you know, we have some developer type people that have a kind of a QA role. They're embedded in the Scrum teams. Again, I don't buy it. Why? QA is a discipline. There's specialized knowledge. I've been a developer. I've been a quality engineer. I've also hired, you know, probably hundreds of people, both as developers and QA engineers now, and there's different personalities, there's different ways of thinking that make people good at those. By the way, the punchline, that story I mentioned where nobody, wanted to do things they had agreed to do, that's when I decided people with the same exact technical skills have different personalities, and some will want to do some kind of things and some won't, right? QA takes a lot of discipline. You have to be very precise, you have to be methodical. Developers sometimes are like, I want to create. I want to, I don't want to have to, follow. So, testing in production, another great idea. Just because you tested everything out before it went into production doesn't mean you should stop there. You can keep testing in production. But I've heard people say, well, Google. I heard a QA person from Google come and say, well, we test, but, we try to get into production as fast as possible. If there are bugs, we just fix them real fast, right? Okay, we'll talk about that. Like, again, not totally convinced. Crowdsourcing. So there's a bunch of these kind of things. Oh, Mechanical Turk, why do we need a QA, organization? So you guys probably can think of other ones, So there's, again, good stuff. It just can be abused. So, silver bullets is just a slang term that originated with stories where I think it was werewolves, right? There was these mythical creatures, and the only way they could be killed was with a silver bullet. So.
No, it's true.
Huh?
It's true stuff.
Okay. Well, my talk is ruined then. Yeah.
Who are the wolves here?
Yeah.
He is a mystical creature now.
Yeah. So the idea is that, hey, if we just have this one silver bullet, we don't need anything else. So that's kind of how it applies. All right. So if you think that, software developers, gosh, if they just didn't write bugs, then we wouldn't have to do testing. So, well, they do. That means we have to pay this tax, all right? Gosh, those developers, we just can't convince them not to write bugs, so we're going to have to pay a tax. All right, quality's important, we'll pay some tax, all right? That means we have to have an organization that's going to do some testing to get the bugs out. Well, executives really wish they didn't have to pay this tax. It's just money spent, right, that they could use for other things. If they do it reluctantly. So, smart people who are ambitious think, wow, if I could just think of some way to get around this tax, the executives will love me. So, if I could just find that silver bullet, right, I'm going to be a hero. So yeah, I'm going to think real hard about this. And you have very receptive executives like, oh, that sounds great, and I really don't want to pay this tax. Let's try that, right? This happens all the time. So where does that lead us? All right, so what does QA really do? So you could say, oh yeah, well, we test stuff, get the bugs out. What I find is there's kind of a spectrum, and actually I did another talk here and it was really about this exact thing. In QA, some people say, well, we're the gatekeepers. By gosh, you are not going to get anything past us unless its quality is at the level where it needs to be. We're going to own it, we're going to do what's necessary, and we are going to uphold the virtue of the company. On the other hand, there's those that say, well, it's more complicated than that. What software goes out to our customers really is a business decision. It's our job to inform that decision. We're going to tell you where the bugs are, we're going to tell you where we've tested, what the risks are, and then people with the ability to make this business trade-off can make the choice. You might say, well, that's the two ends of the spectrum. Maybe there's some blend of the two. I get this. I've had this question asked to me in interviews. Where are you on this spectrum, basically? And my answer is, this is the wrong question. I'm nowhere on that spectrum, because what I believe QA does is not sort of fix things after they're delivered broken, but rather work across the company to have a process that collaboratively results in achieving the quality goals, right? So you're kind of a gatekeeper, you're kind of an informer, but if you want to be proactive and add value, you're helping the company to get better at this stuff, right? How do you build in testability, evangelizing, coverage strategies and whatnot? And how do you execute this efficiently? So, hi, come on in. One of the things that drives me crazy is there's sometimes this victim mentality in QA. I don't know if you guys run into this, but because of this, oh, we're just the tax, we're at the end of the cycle. We have to just kind of live with whatever we, get, however much time we have. We'll do the best we can, work a lot of hours, be a hero. And I've actually run into a lot of QA people that, hang their identity on that. By God, I'll work a lot of hours. I'll be the hero at the end of the cycle. I'll do what it takes, and we'll find some bugs and get it out. I don't like that. It's too passive, and I don't think you're helping the company actually think you are, because you're living with what sort of ridiculous constraints were given to you. But I think the company would be better off with somebody that could help them learn how to do it better and more efficiently. So that's kind of what this is about. That's where I think the career opportunities are. So if you're a quality engineer, products, testing, you might know some automation, test case management, a lot of tools, all this stuff you learn. Better and better and better. Okay, where do I go from there? Oh, I can manage a team of people doing that stuff. That's good. But I think where you go from there is this, you can help your company, be more efficient about getting high quality software on a predictable schedule, right? That's where the big value is. And, I think I've had some experience with that. When you can successfully do that, it gets recognized. Mm-hmm.
So how was the answer you provided during the interview, where you switched that a little bit, how was that received? Were they in a frame of mind where they understood what you were trying to tell them?
It varies, but it's funny. This is sort of off topic, but my philosophy about interviewing is you might as well be yourself. Don't try to say what you think they want to hear, because it helps you select who's going to be a good employer, right? So I've interviewed places where I said, I don't think I should be the gatekeeper, and they're okay, thanks, bye. And I'm like, good, glad I found that out, right? The places that have turned out to be really good places to work, like this story, right? They're like, great, we don't want you to just be passive. We want you to take initiative and, help us figure out how to do this. The other reality is, if you're in QA management, you're probably reporting to somebody that comes from the development side. And usually they're like, this is important stuff, and I don't really know it that well, so I really need somebody that can, help me with it, right? So I think that's, some of the best management I've had is people from the development side that kind of knew what they didn't know and had an appreciation for the QA side, and this plays pretty well with that. So I was just going to say a couple things about, oops, what did we do? We lose our connection. How do they make any money? Yeah, I'm not detecting the device. There we go. Have to oh, there we go. Okay.
Could we ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Please, yeah.
In between also.
Yeah, jump in.
What do you mean by high quality with predictable budgets? How do you justify that?
Sorry, how do I justify?
You said your comments, your wordings, high quality with predictable budgets.
So the notion is that if you tell me you have this much resource, and you have to do this much work, and you have to do it in this time, I have no degrees of freedom. Like, you have to give me 1 degree of freedom. Either I can have more resources or more time, or more or less content, less stuff to do, right? Generally these days, software is released on a fixed cycle. So that's not a degree of freedom. Usually the degree of freedom is the content. Or you can say, well, here's how much I can do with this much resource in that much time. And then you've got to deliver it. So the predictability part comes in there. You basically have to sign up and say, all right, if you only give me this much content in this release with my resources, I can get it done and then do it. Does that make sense?
So you are saying two things. First, you say that you cannot do with those cycles, you don't agree with those things, and now you are saying that there is a cycle that you are saying you have to be given particular resources, number of resources for that particular feature to go, or features to go into that cycle.
Yeah, I didn't mean
That
to.
cycle means, sorry, that cycle means Scrum or Sprint?
It's just a release, whatever the release cadence is. So at Pandora, for example, we release the back-end services on a weekly cycle, and we release the mobile apps on a monthly cycle. So that means each month there's a set of functionality that comes in, and we get the opportunity to say, is that, can we handle that much, right? Same thing with the back end. Is that answering the question? I didn't mean to say that I was against the cycles. I'm not sure what I said that gave the wrong impression there.
I'm not saying that you said it,
Okay.
not that harsh thing,
Uh-huh.
but I was just kind of confused that you were saying two things, so I didn't understand that.
Okay. Did it clarify it?
Kind of.
Okay. Let me know if it's still, if we go on and there's still some
Sure.
contradiction. So let's see, where was I? Okay, you're asking the wrong question. So just a couple things about, oh yeah, so then lastly, you want to think about your role being, I can propose strategies here. You're still not in charge. You can't dictate things, right? What I find to be possibly the most intriguing thing about the whole QA discipline is that it's a very, very hard to measure. Like, okay, if I can get this much more resources, how much better quality can I give you? Well, how do you measure that, right? I can give you my gut feel, but people are, executives love these simple metrics, right? You go and you ask for a budget, I need to hire some more people. Like, okay, what am I going to get for it? That's hard. You can, so I've learned some ways to do it, but it's not easy. It's something I've been in the industry a long time. I feel like I'm still learning stuff. So this isn't so much about how much resources that you need, but more about how you're going to go about testing. Okay, it's that test strategy. And when I say test strategy, it's cross-functional. So don't mistake it for, well, I need this much hardware and I need 169 test cases or things like that. You have to do that, but that's not what I'm talking about. And by testing approaches, I mean different things. Unit tests, automation, manual testing, different types of tests.
Do they fall within this test strategy, test approach?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'd rather not call this a test strategy, but I can't think of a better word. Okay, because people confuse it. It means other things, and it means different things in different companies. It's almost more like it's more like an organizational thing. It's like, well, you guys do this. Okay, like if you do this amount of unit testing and we're going to do code coverage, and so you could decide like, well, you're going to have to do 70% code coverage unit tests, and if you do that, then we'll pass it on to this group, which does some automated or integration testing or something, and then we'll do some manual verification. You might outsource something for coverage on different browsers, whatever. Like that's sort of your game plan. Think of it as a game plan. It doesn't say how many test cases, doesn't say how many people are doing what. It's just more like what the roles are.
This a week back, I had an interview, and in the interview, the test strategy point came over, and I used this word. I cannot say that it's only limited to this thing. It has to be cross-functional. Before that thing, I got the feeling from what he described to me that it's an agile environment. So that's why I used this word. He kind of didn't like it. In fact, not him, but also the release test manager who was there in the conference along with it. Even she didn't like it. Why?
So we will attack them vigorously.
Yeah.
We will have their heads by the end of the evening.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't answer that. I don't know what, there's...
The cross-functional and the agile do not go together or what?
Oh, no, absolutely they do. Agile is supposed to be entirely cross-functional. Yeah, it's hard to know, different terms are loaded in different ways in different companies, it makes it a bit tricky in interviews sometimes, I've found. So at times, I actually have stopped and said something like, well, you know, these terms are used differently in different companies. How do you use it here? And then just to kind of make sure we're syncing up. Because, yeah, if you're not careful, you can say something that actually would make sense to them. It's just in words that they don't use, right? So, oh, yeah.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Maybe it's an extension of what she's talking about. So in Agile, right, there's these teams, like cross-functional teams, and at times they may have a QA, like a dedicated person doing QA,
Mm-hmm.
or they might even like share the responsibility. Okay, like someone's going to be doing QA, or a group of people will do it together, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are your thoughts about like getting some checks and balances in that structure?
Mm-hmm.
So is there a possibility like still have, because I personally feel there's a benefit in also having a QA silo, but at the same time there should be decentralization,
Right.
right? So just want to understand.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. That's a big part of kind of what I'm about here tonight, which is whatever you do. So I'm not against Scrum teams and, you know, this hybrid developer, you know, automation, QA engineer, that can be very effective. But there is a discipline to testing, how it's done in the most efficient way, and that has to come from a centralized QA organization. So any of you at Workday? I don't know this for sure. I know some people, it could be out of date by now, but I don't think Workday has a central QA organization. They have a bunch of QA engineers embedded in development teams, essentially. Sure, it's a great company. We just actually started using Workday at Pandora. I think they could use a central QA organization, but you know, I won't go into that. There's a lot of companies that have done that, and it's you run into this challenge that, you know, that's where Agile's kind of the silver bullet. Well, I don't have to pay this tax. Somehow, like a central QA organization, like, well, they're not producing anything. Like, do I have to pay for that? It just feels like a tax. So big part of the message is here you have to kind of earn your keep. And the way you earn your keep, it's going to come down to why it's economically advantageous, you know, to have this QA discipline. It doesn't have to be everybody. So I'll come back to you in a second, but I'll describe how we do it at Pandora. And there's no one perfect way, but we have a central QA organization. The QA organization does not test. So when you think about Pandora, you can think of it as separate products. There's this Music Genome Project, which is the big data in the back, 60 billion some odd thumbs up and thumbs down, and you know all this information we have about all these millions of songs, and there's a bunch of algorithms. We don't test that in QA. I'll get into why in a little bit. There's all the services that actually stream audio out and deliver ads and all this stuff. We also don't test that. So the QA organization primarily is on the front end. So I actually manage the automation team. There's a separate, we have quality engineers embedded in Scrum teams and a separate release team. So I kind of like it because it's blending some of the best ideas of both of these, central but also decentralized. You'll see a lot of things like performance, security, some of these specialized things, they don't justify having a dedicated person in every Scrum team. So you have to have some shared resources too, right?
What about like, there's also this other, I don't want to call it myth, but you know, within the given sprint you're supposed to have it completely fully tested.
Right.
What are your thoughts about that?
Well, it depends. We'll get into that. And how do you decide? That's, you know, so again, what I would like you to come out of here with is, oh, I have ideas about how this should work, and feel a little more empowered about being able to structure the conversation to have with, you know, your leaders. And, you know, it's not going to be probably a light bulb going on in one conversation, but.
About earning your keep.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you in QA have a way of quantifying what you prevented and what that might have cost had you not been there?
Yeah. believe me, I've been trying for many years, and you know, it's good to keep trying. I don't think there's ever going to be a perfect solution. You know, I've learned a few things. You don't want to count anything by number of bugs, right? So if you tell QA engineers you're going to measure by the number of bugs, you will get a lot of bugs, and you'll get a lot of frivolous little tiny bugs, right? So you don't. There's unintended consequences, but you know, how you measure things will get you results. Engineers are exceptionally good at figuring out the algorithm and tailoring their behavior to it. So you have to be very careful with that. It's good to track how many bugs you're getting in production. It's probably more important to look at the severity. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's one of the key things. So let me come back to that a little bit. Okay. All right, how do we create an optimal test strategy? So something about testing is that there is no definition of done, right? If I tell you I've done every test that could possibly be done, I am 100% confident you will be able to think of other tests I could do, because there's no such thing as all of the tests, right? So by nature, it's an optimization problem. You have some constraints. You know, you have some approaches. You're trying to come up with the best one. It's not going to be perfect, right? So this is why ultimately, no matter our best efforts, there are probably still going to be bugs in software. So think of it that way. Well, I'm here to optimize something. Where I think a lot of quality engineers go wrong is you should start with it kind of from a financial standpoint. Like, why would the executives think it's a good idea to spend this much resource doing what I'm proposing to do? Because at the end of the day, that's the way they're going to evaluate what you're saying. You might as well think of it in those terms, okay? I don't mean a spreadsheet with dollars and cents, but just you have to be able to think like, I'm asking you to invest resource, and here's why, right? Here's what you'll get back from it. And so the way I like to do this is creating a series of questions that cause you to think very deeply about how to optimize. And this is where if you could put it into a spreadsheet, you wouldn't need us. I don't see that happening, right? So the same way I could say there's no silver bullet, you know, to eliminating QA, I'm here to say I don't have a silver bullet to tell you how to magically do this in all situations, but I can give you a bunch of stuff to think about and some ways to kind of frame the discussion. Another thing, this is kind of back to the victim problem, right? So rather than thinking like, oh, I know how to do it, but I can't because I only have these many resources, I don't have enough time, or we don't have people with the right expertise, so I'll just do the best I can, right? That's not going to get you anywhere. Think of it more like it's your job to help kind of enlighten the executives so that they don't allow those problems to happen. Because if they shouldn't be there, you know, if it's good for the company for these problems not to be there, then it should be possible to make that argument. Executives usually aren't as stupid as you think, by the way. I found they're pretty smart people, but everything to them is oversimplified because they've got to, you know, they can't be in the details, right? They're running companies and they're making all these big trade-offs. You have to help them. Okay. And at the end of the day, you make a proposal, it might not get completely accepted. So, you know, and there again, don't get frustrated. Like, okay, you don't like all of this? Like, which parts do you like? And then, oh, what concerns do you have? And you can keep iterating on it. Okay. Does that sound weird? Okay. Yeah. All right, so what are these thought-provoking questions? Well, I don't pretend to have all of them, but I have a few that might be interesting to go through. So we've got maybe, I don't know, 40 minutes to go through the rest of this. My thought was I can bring up examples. I didn't want to list out like dozens of examples for things, but I can sort of drill into any of them that you would like. So feel free. This is where it gets very interactive. Okay. All right, first question. I have a software product. Who or what consumes it? What do I mean by that? So who's the user? So back to Pandora. Music Genome project. Who consumes the output of that? Well, the output of that is a stream of songs. So the listeners consume it, but as far as they're concerned, they're just hearing songs, right? Okay, there's that. We have all these servers with APIs and services, like who consumes that? Well, actually the clients, the apps, the web app, mobile apps, they consume that. And then there are the apps themselves, and that's people interact with that, so they're the consumers. So you've got other things. You've got internal libraries, SDKs. I worked at eBay for a while in the group that processed all the click data. Every click you ever do on eBay is captured. When I was there, I think it was like 5 terabytes per day of data that they process, and they're trying to understand how can we help you find the thing you want to buy as quickly and easily as possible. Or tell you it's not there, we don't have it, right? And a bunch of things like, they have an affiliate program. If you put an ad in your website with a link to eBay, people click it. A lot of places will pay you when you click on something. eBay does not. They pay you when somebody buys something by clicking on the link on your page. Well, how do we know that they bought it after clicking on the link in your page? We have to process all this click data and figure it out, how you got from A to B. So these massive ETL jobs, running in batches overnight, right? Processing all this data. There's an external company that specializes in crunching it and attribution, blah, blah, blah. Who consumes that? Well, then there's a bunch of other sort of applications that do things like figure out how much, each affiliate gets paid. So this is highly relevant because the guiding principle here is you want to test the software in the same way that it's consumed, right? So you wouldn't want a human being sort of going through traces of service calls. Like, that's a great thing to automate. Like, use software to test something that software is going to use. At the same time, so again, if you get sick of hearing about Pandora, let me know, but I know it very well. We have 80 million people using Pandora every month. The reason why is it's super easy and pleasant to use, right? And you get to hear music for free. It has to look good, has to be super simple. You have to not get funny stuff going on because, if there's anything you can't figure out, boom, you're off to somewhere else, right? We've lost you. We don't trust software to be able to detect that. So we actually have upwards of 30 manual testers. We do a lot of automation, but we have like at least 30 manual testers looking at, clicking buttons, make sure it works easy, simply, beautifully.
That's the greatest job, right? Listen to music.
It's not bad. Could be worse. Yeah. Certainly, additional approaches can and should be used to augment that. So, just because a human consumes the app, we have lots of automation for the parts of the app that don't require that sort of judgment, human judgment. Sort of the, if I click this thing where I can, share something on Facebook, it should do that, right? Okay. Quick story, like this was a pretty interesting one. How do you know that the processing of this 5 terabytes of data came out with the right answers? Well, good luck. If you can figure that out, I'm going to hire you. What we discovered was that we would keep sort of a golden data set that was much, much smaller than that, and you can sort of test the basic algorithmic processing, and that's good enough. The trick is keeping the data set up to date with the schema changes and whatnot. What we found the quality problem is that these massive ETL jobs would get stuck. They wouldn't finish on time. One job would assume the output had come from the previous one. It wasn't there. It picked up the previous day's one accidentally. So these were the kind of bugs that really messed us up. You're not used to thinking that way. Like, my job is to make sure that these algorithms are all right. Actually, when I took over that group, they were all focused on that, and I said, when the executives come to me and are all pissed off, it's not because of that. It's because, the job didn't run for 7 days and nobody noticed. Like, literally, we had that one time. We had these affiliates calling up like, hey, I'm not getting any reports about how much money I'm making. Why is that? Somebody, oh, let me go check. Oh, the job didn't run for 7 days. You mean nobody knew the job didn't run for 7 days? And so we spent a lot of time testing alerts and notifications and things like that of failures, right? So starting to build, a thought process here that says, who and what and how is this consumed, and how should we test around that, right? It might not be the natural thing that you think you need to test. Any questions about that? All right, the next big thing is, all right, so I've got some software. Why is it good? What differentiates it from the competition or from doing things another way? Maybe it's super easy to use. Sorry for the typo there. I was like this. That's probably a spell checker, auto correction thing. Thank you so much. East is really a word. Could be that it's got better functionality, more features, does the things that you want, nobody else does. Maybe its performance is better. Depends on the product, right? Or, oh, maybe it does the same thing everybody else does, but totally integrates with everything, all my devices, everything else. There's a lot of different things that can differentiate a product. Again, you better be testing those, right? If you're out in the marketplace, buy my thing because it's better for this reason, it better be better for that reason, right? It's important. So, can't test everything, but what's the differentiator? That doesn't mean that you have to exclude everything else, so that's the point here. It's about emphasis, right? Sure, do all the basics, right? Everything sort of, yeah, thing everybody else can do, we also do, but you better be sure that the differentiators are really working. Okay. Again, for Pandora, it's like, better be easier to use. Okay, well then you got the flip side of it. Where's the complexity? Meaning, where are you likely to find bugs, right? So, way I like to think of it, going back, this is kind of like, a salesman once told me that everything you're selling is either like a vitamin or a medicine. So it's either going to help you be better or it's going to prevent something bad from happening. He says, I'd rather be selling medicine. Medicine's easier to sell. Well, the reality is it's kind of a mix, right? So you've got, the medicine is kind of like, hey, this product fixes something that I can't get fixed another way, okay? The vitamin is, oh, by the way, it better work right. So the thing that I found over and over and over again in my career is that I would say the different things you have to think about in testing is really algorithms, data, and configuration. There's aesthetics, there's integrations, there's other stuff, but these are the big three. Quality engineers think way more about algorithms than they do about anything else, as a general rule. There's exceptions, but it's your job to help make sure that these things aren't overlooked. So data combinations, configuration, it could be parameters, it could be different devices, browser, whatever it is, whatever configuration combinations are important. I'm not saying that you have to spend all your energy there, I'm saying think about it. Is that one of the things that is a cause of complexity? An example, so I worked at Siebel Systems for a while. Siebel Systems, it's funny, what they said is our crown jewels is their data model. They had this data model for how to run a business that was about 3,000 tables. And they said, anybody can write an app that sits on top of a database. The data model is our crown jewels. The reality is what the customers cared about, so at the time this was packaged software going to enterprises, is that you could customize the heck out of this thing. You could make it look however you wanted. You could, brand it. You could customize the screens. PeopleSoft, Workday, all these things are all the same. Very customizable, right? Well, that was the complexity. So it could be customized. You could do, it's all data driven. You had this editor, and you could go create stuff, and it created this data file, and that drove the UI, which then had to work across all the browsers in the world. That was a nightmare. That's where all the bugs were. So again, it could be deceptive. Okay, 3,000, tables, database, well, data model, we better test it. And we did, but we eventually learned that we had to put a lot of energy into figure out how do we test this highly customizable UI and test it across browsers. Okay. The other big thing here is that people think about, oh, my test case is I'm going to do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and the right result is this. They don't tend to think enough about do this, and oh, by the way, let's check and make sure so far this, this, and this are right. And now we're going to do this, and oh, by the way, is it this and the all right? There's a lot of validations in there that tends to get under attended to. So another theme. Right? By the way, that's one of the challenges with automation. You can have automation say do this, do this, do this. It's the check for this, check for this, check for this, right? Automation can't find a bug you didn't predict. So. Okay, what dependencies exist? Software tends to have a lot of dependencies. You're dependent on maybe integrating some external services. At Pandora, you can buy a subscription and pay $5 a month and you get no commercials. So we integrate with payment services, credit card processing, all that kind of stuff. Tons of complexity in that, right? Libraries, input data, so that's kind of back to the ETL thing, one job dependent on the data coming from another job on this pipeline. Platform dependencies, that takes a lot of forms. Maybe you run on different OSs, devices. So I don't know why, but people tend to assume that external things work, right? Don't, right? So, back to that, the eBay example, that whole thing about click processing, we had this one external vendor that had some magic algorithms that take all these clicks and somehow determine how to attribute the, the initial entry into the site and what led to the purchase. So turned out that we had this agreement with our affiliates that if we didn't get them the information on time, that we had to pay penalties. The external service, I asked the question, do we have, so okay, we depend on them. We actually need them to process it in this amount of time. Do we have an SLA from them? No, we don't. Well, we've told people we're going to pay them penalties. If we don't get done on time, we're dependent on them, and they have no obligation whatsoever. So I said, all right, well, we're going to test that. We're going to keep statistics, and we're going to see what they really do. And go back to them. Basically, we wound up eventually negotiating an SLA, but maybe more importantly, we had some recovery where we could do a partial thing if we didn't get that data. So it was a lot about, oh, really the bug here is we have no fallback. So we can't trust them, therefore we have to have a plan B. So the bug here was kind of a design flaw, not just an execution error. And you got to test worst case scenarios. You probably don't have to test all like flaky little things. Can't, right? You can't test. You don't want to test the external service, but you want to test what happens when the external service kind of falls apart. Questions?
For external services, do they let you get into them? How do you tell them that this is there and you need to fix it? And how do you kind of force them to do it? And you said that you wanted something that say, okay, they are not doing it, so let's redo it. How do you get that permission? Do they give you?
It varies. So it depends on the contracts. Usually, some places you'll have a sandbox place where you can play with, their stuff in a test kind of environment, and you can try to stress their stuff. Other times you test accounts, where you're actually live, but you can, try certain things out. But it's again, there's no magic answer here. But I think the lesson I came away with is that in a testing strategy, I actually got a lot of very positive recognition at eBay when I came in and said, we're testing the wrong stuff. We're trying to validate all these data transformations. They seem to work pretty good. And oh, by the way, these data scientists, when they created new ones, they would sort of go eyeball the data themselves, and they did pretty good at catching flaws, right? And I said, but have you noticed, like, our business is taking a hit because we're getting impacted by external services and these jobs not running, and we have no, like, initially we had no alerts. Like, when something failed, like I said, this happened 7 days, it wasn't nobody noticed, right? And I went in and said, we not only need to be testing this, but we need to build some stuff into the product that handles this. And they thought, it wasn't because my team had found 1,000 bugs, it was that we had this insight about the quality. Right?
And sometimes it's not about forcing somebody to fix it. I used to work for a large organization that they are very risk averse. So everything put into the table, like how it's gonna fail, can we detect it if it's failed, how bad it is if it's failed.
Right.
And if it turn out to be, yeah, it's not too bad if it failed, easy to detect, then let it go, don't do anything about it. But just at least you have a checkbox that yeah, okay, you done your job. So basically, from here, I think it's just our job is basically like identify that it could be failed, but like let the whole team decide like what we're gonna do with it.
That could not have been a better segue. So the next thing is, what are the consequences of a bug? And I kind of put that into the business category. It's not about the product. It's like, okay, so if a bug does happen, what's the consequence of that? By the way, I'm happy to share this deck, and we're recording it. I don't know, do you guys have a place to post the deck, or I could email it out or something? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I should have mentioned that up front, so you don't have to. Yeah, so this is a great point, right? There's a lot of different possibilities of what can happen when you have a bug. Sometimes it's like, well, so eBay, this was the constant concern. You can go to Amazon, you can go whatever, right? So initially, more on the user side of it, we would say, oh, well, if we start seeing users having a lot of problems, we'll sort of monitor production. Well, the problem is you don't know. They just go away. They don't complain. That's too much time and effort. I want to buy a new iPhone. Click, click. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, I'll go to Amazon, right? You lose users and you don't know about it, right? So that's bad. There's legal liability. You expose somebody's credit card data because there was a bug. You're going to be in hot water. Not to mention loss of reputation, a lot of security issues and things like that. Degraded revenue is an interesting one. So, eBay, another great example, they would sometimes say, well, we're going to try something. We're going to rearrange the way this page is. Like, if people don't like it, they might not be able to find our product enough. We'll get a bit less revenue, but worth a shot. And so they would say, oh, yeah, it turned out we lost $250,000 that we would have had according to trends, and like, okay, Now, was that a bug? No, it wasn't a bug. That was an intentional test, right? So one of the things that I haven't talked about yet, but it's huge these days, is A/B testing. Okay, so what I found out there was they were going to try this thing. So what if there was a bug in the software? Like, okay, well, it's all right. It was a test. It's usually only going to some small percentage of the users. Like, no big deal. The big deal is if you have a bug that results in the data coming back from that experiment being wrong, they're going to make the wrong decision. They're going to say, oh, and this happened too. We got this data back. We're going to try this thing. Oh, we know people are going to love it. This is a no-brainer. It came back negative data. Like, what? This isn't possible. And we dug into it. There was a bug in the software. It just didn't work. So people weren't being able to do what they wanted, the way we measured success. So that was bad news. We just spent 2 weeks running this experiment, gathering all this data, and we didn't learn anything, right? So that's an interesting kind of lesson for me that you might say, well, how do we test that then? Like, well, there's certain types of bugs you could probably survive, and usually they want to go quickly. We're going to try this out. We're going to get the results. We're going to try something else, Okay, I'm going to help you go as fast as you want to go, but you really don't want to get invalid data because that'll send you off in the wrong decision-making process about what the product should be to satisfy the customer, right? This is a big thing, I would say, in the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, A/B testing is everywhere. You guys probably deal with it. It's added a different wrinkle, I think, to some of the testing. We face that. So we do, all the Scrum teams do their stuff, try to validate the new functionality. It goes into the release team for the apps before they go out. The releases team is supposed to do regression. They cover like a broad swath of devices and OS versions. And they test, experiment on, experiment off. But primarily, well, it's like most people are going to have experiment off, so that's where our focus is. Well, okay, that's okay, but you have to make sure we don't get deceptive data back, right? So we've been working on, that's what we're doing to our automation framework, is building in a lot more capability to test different experiences based on these experiments. And it goes all the way to sometimes nothing much, right? So remember Google? I said, oh, we don't bother testing that much. We just rely on, Well, I dug into that a little more. The reason why is search, right? Okay, so I did a search. What should have come up number 13 in my results came up number 14. That's a bug. What bad thing is going to happen to Google as a result of that? Not much, because statistics show people don't go past about 3 results, and they never go to the second page within 0.00% or whatever, right? So that's kind of where they were coming from. Now, theoretically, if the searches aren't in the right order, you don't have as much like ad revenue, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it can impact them, but they can measure that in production. It doesn't make sense for them to spend tons of time before it goes into production because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that much. They're testing for the catastrophic failures. So when they say we don't test much, they test for catastrophic failures, and for detailed working of the algorithm, they don't worry about it too much. Remember I said earlier, the whole thing about testing all these ETL jobs and the data being exactly right? Same kind of thing. It was off a little bit. Yeah, things might not be optimized quite as good as you want, but the catastrophic failure is when the whole thing didn't run and nobody noticed. Okay. So the guiding principle here is, you need to look at the consequences. This is where you can really talk value proposition to your, executives. These kind of bugs, I need to put people on those, right? We don't want to have those happen. Here's what kind of testing we're going to have to do to prevent those. And also back to, where is it? Some of these things, right? Like, if we're hanging our hat on our product being better than our competition this way, what is it worth to you to make sure that that's really the case? Well, then you go, oh, it's worth a lot. Like, okay, here's the testing we have to do that, right? This is kind of the language. So I don't know if this is making any sense, but because I've seen a lot of people go to management and say, I need more people because I have 2,000 test cases I can't run. It's like, well, exactly what? And like, how do I measure that, right? So talking this way is more effective. All right, what are the keys to success for the business here, not the product? Here's an interesting one. Pandora falls into this. A lot of companies. Oh, I started a web startup. I'm not making a profit, but I'm getting lots of users. Yay, that'll be good someday, right? Well, the truth of the matter is, yes, you do have to do that. You have to have critical mass. And then when you succeed, you have to monetize it. So depending on where you are, like if you're in the early days, you need a lot of users, and you're testing to make sure the monetization works, you're probably not focusing on the right thing. You need to make sure you're getting a lot of users. Pandora, literally 80 million people, that's just in the US, Australia, and New Zealand. There's only, 300 million people, counting kids and everybody in here. So how many more are you going to get? We're now in the game of how do we monetize that. We spend a lot of our time about making sure ads are delivered properly and in ways that don't annoy people, right? So We do still test this. We want to make sure our users stay happy. Yes, absolutely. But a lot of energy goes into how to test the ad delivery and all those algorithms. Sometimes it's a time to market advantage or some kind of competitive edge because something or other. Well, that might tell you, okay, if our business needs to be there first in order to succeed in this whatever marketplace you're in, then going in and making a case of I need more time to test isn't going to go over very well. So it's going to be...
Doesn't that just mean no testing?
It could, probably not. But, you know, this is where you kind of have to say, you know, I have to be able to justify economically what I'm proposing for testing. So when you say time to market is more important, I've been in, so, you know, what's a good example? How did DOS, you know, ever go anywhere? I don't know, I'm old, but when DOS first came out, it was the worst thing that ever happened to, you know, microcomputers at the time, right? They're first. So we have Microsoft to live with still today. Right? DOS back then was just full of bugs, full of bugs. There's any number of examples of products that were just full of bugs when they went out, but they differentiated. They did things nobody else could do. People loved them. They put up with the bugs, right? And it was early days. There was no competition. That only lasts for so long, right? So, and oftentimes, another problem you run into companies like, well, this has worked for us all along. We never had to test, and we went great. Like, okay, that was in that phase. We won that, now we're in a different one, right? So a great book I recommend is called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore. There's an even better one that I like more called Inside the Tornado that was like a follow-up to that, and it talks about what worked in the early stage of company, you almost sometimes have to completely reverse. So, how are we doing on time? Okay, yeah. Uh-huh.
You just mentioned that Pandora has a user base in those 3 countries, and I know Pandora is not available when you go to Europe. Is it the company decision or is it the country restriction?
It's licensing music is very complex. It's a different business than, say, Spotify, which is on demand. If you're doing on demand, you have to go make deals with every music label. In the US, Australia, and New Zealand, if you're playing radio, which means you can't go pick what song you're going to hear next, there's something called a statutory rate. We don't have to negotiate with anybody. We just pay this amount of money to whoever song it is, and we can just go. So that's how we, you know, got going fast. We've come out and said we do now intend to go international at some point, but we're going to have to work deals in every country, different deals with different music labels and whatnot. So.
I used to work for a company whose product was a VPN, virtual private network, and we provide 18 virtual locations. And the advertising that they do, be able to get hotspot shield with our VPN and be able to listen to your favorite Pandora music wherever you are in the world. So, as I mentioned, my toddler would fall asleep with Pandora radio. So when we went to France, I had to use the VPN so we can have that. So will you be able to track those users that are using your application from countries they're not supposed to use with the help of VPN?
Yeah, so we have an obligation to try to prevent that kind of thing because essentially we don't have the music rights to deliver music outside of the country. Everybody on both sides kind of recognize there's only so much you can do. So as long as we're, you know, doing everything that's practically possible to try and detect that and prevent that, and it's not like, you know, an epidemic, then the music labels probably aren't going to get too upset about it. So yeah, we get that all the time because people love Pandora. Like, I love working there because every party I go to, where do you work? Pandora. Like, oh, I love Pandora. Like, that's good.
Now he knows.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's ways around almost everything.
I guess that's a very common problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, we would love to deliver music. I mean, one thing about Pandora is we just like delivering music to people. I mean, people love music. There's a lot of musicians that founded the company, that run it, that work there. People in my team of automation engineers, I have people working in bands on the weekends and evenings. You know, a lot of musicians there. We like getting music out, but we also want to be legitimate and not shortchange. Because what happens is that's essentially taking money out of the pockets of the musicians in a way, right? So we don't want to shortchange them either when we can. Okay. All right. Yeah, so kind of, this is an interesting point here. It isn't just about eliminating bugs, but also validating that requirements are satisfied. So you'll see a lot of the same things, you know, same themes going through here, that if you just view testing as, oh, we're finding bugs, that can be a little too narrow. You're also validating designs, you're validating requirements at times, right? And having this awareness of keys to success for the business is really helpful. And last thing that I'll touch on, this could be a much longer topic. I decided not to go down that slippery slope, but there are organizational factors. And I like to think about accountability, right? So different companies have different philosophy about accountability, everything from the Facebook, you know, reputation for the wall of shame. You break the build, you're like, you know, shame to all your peers. I think that's a little heavy-handed, but it is accountability. All the way to, I worked at places where you said to engineers, you have to do unit testing, and they said, okay, I did it, like, great. How do I know? I think you're nice, and I'm not saying you're lying, but, you know, how do we know you did unit tests, and how do we know what coverage you got, and, oh, did they pass, right? This becomes part of the strategy. So we, as I mentioned, we don't, our QA organization at Pandora doesn't test the services, so we depend on the developers themselves to write extensive unit tests, and integration tests are all automated. They do that. They're very good about it. We have a good culture there. They usually pass. Occasionally they don't. Usually you'll find where people say, oh, it doesn't pass, I know why, we're in a rush, I'll fix it later, right? Good intentions, I don't want to hold things up, but we just last month made the decision that we were not going to allow you to do a pull request unless all the unit tests pass. We actually went into we have an automated Jenkins job builder and integrated in with the build and the bug tracking and everything, and we just went in there and said, you just can't do it, flat out, right? So we raised the bar in accountability. Now, that won't always fly. Part of the reason why we said we think we can do this now is because we feel good that we're close enough to that level that it's not going to suddenly bring everything to a halt, right? So I wouldn't recommend that if you normally had thousands of failures in your unit test, because that would just bring everything to a grinding halt. But you might say, you can't increase that number with any of the changes you made, and hopefully with working off technical debt. You can have different plans, but you got to have some way to talk about accountability. So, you know, I worked at places where if there was a production bug, the CEO or whoever would go to the product manager and say, you screwed up. Product manager, I don't write any code, I don't test any code. Why did I screw up? Well, you own this, right? You were supposed to make sure everybody was doing their job. Okay, is that good or bad? I don't know, but that's the accountability model they chose. So you could be aware of that, what the company has. You can propose changes that are going to make it better, right? But it's important. I worked at Intuit for a while in their payments division, and they were kind of like that. The product manager expected to kind of own everything, and I tried to change it, and they just weren't going to hear it. So, okay, I think it would be better. Kind of goes back to what I said, you could propose things, but at the end of the day, they say, no, that, okay, so given that, if we want that accountability model, here's what I think we should do to make that work.
In an environment like that, does the product manager have control over testing and say, okay?
Yeah, well, there's a long story behind that. So the product managers started feeling like they had to have control over the testing since they were being held accountable. And that's where it got into a little bit of tension, right? And so that was, again, but that's where you can add value. So it was my job then to say, I understand. If I were in your shoes, I'd want to have some control too, to feel like, you know, if I'm going to be held accountable, I have some way to control my destiny. So what do you feel like you need? And they said, I need some exit criteria and blah, 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 and a process. Like, okay, that sounds reasonable to me. We'll put that in place. I don't expect you to go test the software. I don't expect you to sit in the bug reviews, but you're going to want to see the output of that. And I think it makes sense. So that becomes part of the test strategy. We also we made a couple of, so this might be too much detail, but it might be relevant. So one of the tension points was, it's always an issue, like, okay, we got all the bugs fixed, we're ready to go. Oh, last minute, oh, there's this one bug, we got to fix it. Okay, quick, fix the bug. Okay, it's just one fix, right? Okay, do a quick check, put it out. Like, okay. That's where a lot of things go awry, right? If you screw something in that last bug where you're trying to rush it out, you know, that's a very common failure scenario. And that was what was happening a lot, and the product managers were getting beat up for it. And they said, well, you know, how do you guys make decisions? I have no way to evaluate. That's just too hard. Like, how much is enough testing? And so what we said was, okay, you know what, we're actually going to put a moratorium on, to start with. And we basically said we have to do something kind of extreme to start with, and we'll work our way better from there, as opposed to we're in a bad place now and we're going to try to, over time, make it better, right? And that was pretty successful, because they said, great. Okay, if you're going to lock, I think it was like the last 2 days, you know, no fixes could go in, period, right? Or else you had to, you know, you still had to have 2 days after that last fix. So, yeah, that worked. Now, having said that, I don't think that's the best model. So I think you want a distributed accountability that mostly lies between the developers and the quality team. So like I said, you're going to do these unit tests, you're going to do these integration tests on the service. We have some way of measuring that, and we can say, no, we're not going to take it if we don't like the results. That's accountability for them. Okay, then the Scrum teams have this amount of responsibility for testing, and how do we know they've done their job? And then the release team has this responsibility. How do we know their job is done? That's, everybody's got an accountability.
So I don't know if we're at a point where this question is even something we can address yet. But what about in distributed teams where the teams are perhaps developing here, testing over there? How do you manage something like that?
Well, I don't think anything about this approach is really addressing that. Either more what I would hope to do is, you know, give you some things to ask yourself that you could go in and say, what are the challenges that result from this distributed way we're doing things? And, you know, maybe it doesn't require anything different, you know, just some late night conference calls, right? Maybe the accountability is different. One of the things that does come up, you know, you guys are interested in this, I'm sure, like when you are outsourcing things, the accountability model is a little different because they don't have as much skin in the game. And so I've always said when we are outsourcing something, somebody internal is going to be accountable for what they do at a pretty fine granularity. Doesn't mean you have to like redo everything they did, but you've got to understand at a detail level what they're doing and be okay with it, right? Just some way to kind of tell. All right.
You would hope that person has some power when they feel things are just, when they feel things are not right. I've often felt like working with offshore teams is kind of, it makes you feel like you don't have enough control.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff can just happen and you can talk and talk and talk at subcommittee.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, nothing is happening, nothing is substantially changing. And
Right.
you'd want to flip some bit that you said didn't work.
I'm probably not the best qualified person in here to talk about this, but I would say there's different models. So one is, okay, if you have a remote team, is there a manager at the remote team? So I had one situation where there wasn't. We just essentially had engineers. So I said, okay, in my team, every 2 engineers remotely has 1 engineer here who's kind of can vouch for what they're doing, and also, by the way, would get them unstuck when they were stuck on something, right? If there's a manager, then they need to have clear, you're accountable for this, and how can I look at that? But actually, it's not that different than having a local team that's internal. You still have to have those, you don't have to look over people's shoulders, you don't have to blame, you just have to be able to, you know, trust but verify, right? Like, I know you guys are good. Oftentimes, I could get into whole things about, you know, organizational theories, but I find that in larger organizations, the problem comes in middle management, because the executives say, we don't want you guys to do the wrong thing, but we don't know the details figured out. The individual contributors know the right thing to do. The middle managers are like, oh, I don't think I have the flexibility to do this. And oh, I think I want to please my upper management. Therefore, we're going to take some shortcuts or whatever, and they usually are the ones that mess things up. So if you get clarity there, sometimes the message has to come from the execs, don't do shortcuts that are going to impact quality. Like, I'm surprised I have to tell you this, but, you know, it's funny. So people wind up thinking they don't have authority sometimes when they do.
One thing I find about working with remote team is it's kind of a long-term process. You kind of have to train them, as in like, not training, but tell them that this is the quality you expect. Because you can't blame them for not knowing that this is the level of quality you expect. You just kind of have to keep repeating and saying, no, that's not what I'm looking for. This is not the quality I'm looking for.
There's a lot of easy mistakes to make. If you hired a new person locally, you wouldn't expect that they'd be doing top-notch work in their first week. And yet, when you outsource something, oftentimes you expect magically in the first week it's going to be like, you know, this is why we're paying you guys. We're going to, you know, you have to do the same thing. You have to bring them along. You might have to say, you run some tests, we're going to run the same tests, we're going to compare notes. We'll give you feedback about what you missed, how to get better. You have to invest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good
That
point.
was the thing. One time I was helping an offshore team in Siemens, and since they're medical, it's a medical firm, right? So their medical terminology and the rules and regulations they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
So that person whom I was talking to, and I was saying that this is a defect, open up, you have to open up the defect.
Right, right.
That person won't understand, why is it like that? This is how it is. It would have taken only 5 minutes, but it took more than 2 hours. Even that person wasn't convinced. I somehow got that feeling, and I said, okay, I'll open up the ticket from here.
Mm-hmm.
I was questioned that was tested over there. Why did you open up that ticket?
Yeah, yeah.
I was like kind of put in a situation as to what to do. Should I be telling them, like, kind of babish thing to complain that person didn't do what I asked him to do because I was explaining him all the rules and regulations, and, you know, and what to do, how to clear up my side and everything. So it was kind of like, you are put into some kind of these kind of situations. How do you handle all these things? I mean, like.
Well, so let me ask you, you did a pretty good job explaining it right there. Did you try that on your management or whoever was complaining?
I didn't say it like kind of a complaint kind of a thing. I just said that kind of a little bit of a lighting. Like I said, I was explaining the network. I mean, it wasn't good, the reception, so it kept on dropping. So maybe there was some kind of a miscommunication and all that thing. And I knew that if I see that guy, I would punch.
Yeah.
So this is a super interesting example. Thanks for bringing that up, because you didn't really educate the management about what the real problem was.
I couldn't do it.
Well,
Even the management didn't know, and they were arguing with me. So then what happened is that somehow my release test manager, she was like a kind of a very friendly, because I was a junior and she was a senior in the same school.
mm-hmm.
So she she called me and she said, tell me exactly the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
I promise you that I won't let it out. So then she she did is that she came out with something kind of a suggestion to the managers and the project managers that Sagia will mentor these managers, bring them over here, and she will mentor them. And I said, oh, God. I'm going to see those people, the first thing I'm going to see is punch them. I was like so much upset, but then I was
Yeah.
told to mentor them. I said, well, I'm a junior and I'm going to mentor those managers. Anyway, when they came, they had only 15 days, no, 14 days. And noon, by 15th of noon, they had to be shipped back, otherwise the Siemens over there has to pay US tax.
Mhm.
So 14 days of, like, I didn't even know whether I had my breakfast, my lunch, did I eat anything, did I do anything. I was like all the time, trying to figure out how to explain. And then the guy who was there, he came after doing all these things, he brought up the same ticket. He said, why did you open up the ticket when I was saying that this is not a bug? And I told him, I said, I explained to you all those things. Has it gone wasted? Were you sleeping?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is.
Love it.
I think there's some really, really good lessons in here. First thing that strikes me is management probably. I don't know who made the decision, but what the offshore team was tasked to do probably wasn't a good match
Yeah.
for what they were able to do, right?
Where was the team geographically?
Bangalore.
So this is exactly what I'm talking about with test strategies, right? So at eBay, we said, okay, we've got an offshore team. We had actually employee offshore team and we did outsourcing. Like, okay, what's the right thing for the outsource team to do? Well, we said, first off, we don't control their careers. They're going to move on and off the project. We at least feel with our employees we have some ability to do retention, blah, blah, blah. So we can't expect them to have as much time and knowledge about the deep, deep product knowledge, right? They're good. They're good quality engineers. They know what they're doing. So why don't we have them take what we've already tested, but just test it across all the browsers? They're really good. They found all the quirks of the different browsers. They didn't have to know the product super deep. You could just tell, right? Just be a user. That was something they did very well because it matched sort of their capabilities, and they have turnover. And we just said, you know what? This is going to be probably kind of a boring thing. So it's okay. Have them do it for a while, then rotate some new people in. And actually, the fresh eyes was better, right? So the first thing, I'll get back to you in a second. The first thing is, it's back. You can help your management understand this is not a good fit, right? You wouldn't ask your 4-year-old child to do calculus. Like, why are you asking a team that isn't familiar with regulatory things to test that, right, or whatever? Second thing, though, is, you were frustrated. Probably they were just as frustrated, the testers, right, because they felt they couldn't succeed. They probably felt the same pain. I don't have enough time to learn this, right?
No, they felt like kind of a seniority attack because I was a junior, and why am I telling them
Yeah.
that this is not right? They couldn't take that.
There's a bunch of things.
So-
And I would just guess also that they felt like, what do you expect me to learn in 14 days? That's not nearly enough time, right? I'm a big believer, it's like there are certain things everybody kind of knows just don't make sense. And yet, you can sometimes feel it's hard to deliver that message. It's often how you deliver it. If you deliver it in these economic terms and say, hey, look, if we're going to spend money for this, they're well suited for this thing. And what if we switch and have them do this and we'll test this, right? If you come in with proposals like that, people will listen. Less so of like, well, this isn't working because of this, they're stupid or they, bad connection on the phone or whatever. Management's like, well, I don't know what to do about that. You're not really giving them any choices, to make.
I wasn't in that position,
I know,
right?
I know,
So I
yeah.
was a junior, right?
Yeah.
So I had, the only person I could look up to is my release test manager to explain to them what my thoughts are and what my proposal and
Yeah.
suggestions are. But at that time, it was very critical because, one thing happened, good thing happened. After that, there were all the smoke test, which comes after every release test, was taken off from Bangalore. No smoke test. because of this thing happened and or the whole critical thing. It was a critical thing. I said, this is critical, it needs to be opened up.
Right.
And I'm going to, first thing in the morning, I'm going to get up at 6 in the morning. It's already 3 a.m. over here. I'm going to get up at 6 in the morning, run to the office and make them work on this ticket. It's very important. But the only thing it happened is all these things happened.
Yeah.
I had to get this thing done. So after that, the whole smoke test thing was taken off from their responsibility task and everything. No smoke test will be done over there, and everything will be done.
So another key point you made, sometimes you're not in a position of having enough voice to really deliver a message directly. You have to go through your management. This doesn't have anything to do with QA, but I think a good approach I always take is, how can I make my manager look like a hero, right? And if you're not too hung up on whether you get the quality or not, you know, it's not, it's a little more, there's no karma involved. It's pretty direct. Like if you help your manager be a hero, they're going to be happy with your work, right? Even though you may not have gotten the visibility and the credit. So sometimes it's selling or convincing the manager who has more contacts, and hey, why don't you suggest something like this and let them go run with it.
Yeah, that's why she was very happy and
Yeah.
always used to back me up and all the things.
Right.
And she said, okay, I made my decision. She's going to mentor all these team managers.
Right.
And I said, well, that was the decision you made.
Right. You had a question?
I think you touched on something that I approach from time to time with regards to this nearshore software development and testing offer that we have. And that is to suggest to companies that are here, that are considering that, with the high cost of talent here, most of the new hires locally in the U.S. or in the Bay Area are interested in working on cutting edge things, on creativity and stretching their own experience and so on. So I always suggest that they identify items that can be offloaded, or boring, repetitious, or things, as you mentioned, that have already been tested here but might be tested across different platforms, that they tackle or share those with the nearshore team, and that they focus on, so they can extract maximum value.
Yeah, and by the
from
way,
resource.
same exact argument works for automation. So another thing, our philosophy at Pandora is that our objective for automated tests is not to find a ton of bugs. We expect people are going to find more bugs. What the automated tests do is take off their plate the boring, repetitive tests that probably usually pass. So regression tests, you got to do it. You know, you got to make sure you catch the, you know, you don't have to find that many bugs, but it's really good you did when there was a major breakage, right? And then you allow the manual testers to do exploratory testing, use their savvy about, oh, I talked to the developer, I understand where this risk, like, great. Go do that. You don't have to do all this boring, repetitive stuff. Automation can do it. Or if there's an offshore team that's, you know, doesn't have to be as, you know, maybe intimately connected with the developers, for example, then they could do a different kind of testing. So it's, all these things are exactly what I'm talking about, is matching up who does what in the most effective way and not trying to force fit in. And you wind up having to sometimes push back on executives because they come up with these, I had this great idea. We're going to have an offshore team and they're going to do all the, you know, smoke testing or whatever. You might have to say, oh, great idea to use some offshore team. There might be some, you know, other options for how we could use them more effectively, right? Or, you know, sometimes it's just talking about, you know, rather than saying, oh, that's a stupid idea, I have a better one, you could say, oh, there's different options. Let's weigh the pros and cons, right?
I want to take this a little further because we're talking about testing, and the other day I heard this report on NPR about how, regarding AI, artificial intelligence, how some of these machines are actually self-programming themselves up into different levels. So how does testing fit into an AI environment like that?
Yeah, that's probably a whole nother meetup discussion. Yeah.
When the robots have destroyed us, then they were programmed correctly.
Yeah. So we're out of time, and I don't want to abuse the graciousness. I want to thank the QASource people, Mike in particular, for hosting us. This has been great. Thank you all for your interaction. I had a good time. Hope you learned a little something.